Good evening, one and all. I welcome you all on behalf of Digital Accounting and Assurance Board and SAFA to this seminar on forensic investigation and controls. And we have a great lineup of people who would be sharing their expertise with us. So, first, I will introduce our very own chairman of Digital Accounting and Assurance Board, who does not need an introduction, uh, CS Nanda sir. Nanda sir is a Central Council member who is since 2022. He is also the chairman of Digital Accounting and Assurance Board of ICAI, also the chairman of Committee in Financial Markets and Investor Protection, and a chairman of Committee on Information Technology of SAFA. He's also vice chairman of Internal Audit and Management Accounting. I would like Nanda sir to welcome the participants.
Nandaji has joined because we don't see.
Yeah, Nanda sir. Okay, Nanda sir has left the meeting. Okay.
Sir, there is some network issue. So you please continue, sir.
So I got received a call from Nanda sir that he has some network issues. He's at the airport, so but he would join in whenever he can. So let's continue. I would like to introduce Nihar Jambusaria sir, who is the past president of ICAI and the current president of SAFA. Sir, would you like to say a few words?
Yeah, only to just kick off. Let me at the outset thank CS Charanjot Singh Nandaji for once again organizing this webinar on forensic investigation and controls and offering it to the members of SAFA also. And we have seen in last 2 to 3 months that DAB along with Information Technology Committee of SAFA organized a large number of programs on information technology. And although strictly forensic investigation and controls, very strictly speaking, is not really information technology subject, but it does require use of information technology to the maximum to deliver to the expectation of stakeholders. And as we all know, that in the last few years, the expectations of stakeholders and expectations of society from auditors have gone up, and they have misunderstood the role of statutory auditor as one of investigation, whereas it is not really the role of investigator. And therefore, the role of forensic auditor assumes a very much important role whenever there is something fishy or there is some doubt about some of the controls, or there is a doubt about some fraud having been committed. It is only the forensic audit which can bring to light what is the reality. And unless forensic investigation is conducted and there are adequate controls even in forensic audit, it is not possible to really achieve the objective for which it is meant. India last year or the year before came out with number of standards on forensic investigation. This would enable the forensic auditors to have uniformity in their approach. And today we have expert speakers to speak on forensic investigation and control. I will not take longer time, except for once again thanking the committee for organizing this program for the benefit of members, chartered accountants in India, and members of SAFA. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for your kind words, or for your words of wisdom. So it is very, as rightly said by you, it is very important to distinguish between forensic accountants and the auditors, which is there is a wide overlap which we have observed, and DAB has been trying to create that distinction with even with the forensic accounting standards. We have tried very diligently to create the difference between forensic accountants and the auditors. Forensic audit is not supposed to be used in our deliberations also. So thank you, sir. Without wasting any time, I would like to introduce the speakers who would be presenting.
Bharatji, Nandaji has joined. If you can ask him, he has just joined, and probably he is at airport and may not be in a position to continue for a very long time. So if he can speak,
I should. Nanda sir, can you? Would you like to welcome the Nihar sir has already welcomed? Then would you like to say a few words? I think. I think sir is not. I think he'll just. I would just
want to welcome the honorable. Sarabji, Mr. Mr. Puneet Girwal and all. Please go ahead. Thank you so much. Please go ahead. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Right, sir. So
please go ahead.
I think yes, there is some problem with the network over there. Okay, so I would just start with introducing Saurabh Khosla, sir. Saurabh Khosla, sir, is a partner in forensic and dispute services in Deloitte. He is a chartered accountant, a company secretary, and a lawyer. He has also completed his CFE from Gujarat Forensic Science University and Forensic Accounting and Fraud Detection Certification from ICAI, and has more than 15 years of experience. Sir brings vast experience in forensic and anti-corruption compliance, including risk compliance and internal control reviews. He has served a number of clients in emerging sectors in India, including renewable energy, technology, pharma, EPC companies, etc. He's also a member of the technical committee on ISO 37001 anti-bribery management systems with the nodal agency of ISO in India. He has extensive experience of working with international law firms and has been instrumental in assisting corporates in developing and implementing compliance frameworks, including for corporates who were in process of being listed. He has delivered trainings and awareness sessions for employees to introduce and or enhance effectiveness of corporate compliance framework. I think this session is being done by Saurabh sir and Puneet sir together. So should I introduce Puneet sir also?
Yes, please, Bharat.
Yes. So again, Puneet is an associate director with Forensic and Dispute Services of Deloitte. He's a member of ICAI and ICAI Institute of Chartered Accountants of England and Wales. He's an MSc in Forensic Accounting and a certified fraud examiner. He has over 9 years of extensive experience in handling white-collar crimes and has worked with multiple enforcement agencies under the Government of India, such as SFIO, CBI, and Income Tax. Puneet brings vast experience in forensic and anti-corruption compliance, including risk compliance and internal control reviews. He's a member of drafting team for forensic and investigation standards and guidance note on FAIs issued by ICAI. He has developed anti-fraud programs for organizations and helped organizations in standardization of approach to internal investigations through investigation manuals. He has vast experience of training internal investigation teams and also has been a regular speaker at the forums of ICAI. I welcome both of you. Please start, Saurabh sir.
Thank you so much, Bharat, and thank you, Nihar sir, as well, and Nanda sir, for laying out the context. I think this sets us very well for this session. Just give me a second. I'll try to put my slides on sharing.
Sure.
Let me do that, Saurabh.
Okay, thanks, Puneet. Yeah. I think you have to put them on slideshow first and then share, otherwise it will show the other screen.
Okay, just one sec.
Yeah.
Is it okay?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we can quickly move to the next slide. It has the context and the background has been said pretty well by the speakers earlier. Just a quick disclaimer, and yes, that's the agenda for the day. Let us move forward. Okay. So I think, when we are talking about forensic investigations, it is very important to understand what really are we investigating. So typically, out of the multiple things that may come to our, attention to investigate, one of the major, obviously, components is that of fraud. So what is fraud really? There is a definition for fraud in the Companies Act, which says that it includes any act or omission of misrepresentation or concealment where there's an intent to deceive or to gain an undue advantage from injuring the interests of others. It could be a company, it could be a shareholder, their creditors, or whichever way, and in a way which leads to a wrongful gain or a wrongful loss. So that is how the Companies Act defines it. In today's time, considering the kind of developments we have gone through, there are multiple statutes actually which determine and define what fraud is, but we thought this was the closest to our areas of business, and which is why we use this definition. There's also an Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, which has also put down a definition for fraud, which says it includes any intentional or deliberate act to deprive another of property or money by guile, deception, or other unfair means. So a very crisp definition compared to the one which we have in Companies Act, but you can see that it also communicates a message of what really a fraud is. There's a Black Law Dictionary definition as well, which is which largely refers to a knowing misrepresentation of truth. And in simple terms, one can say if there is any wrongful gain to self or to others, whether it is through, for example, a bribery or a forgery or a corruption or embezzlement, that is how we typically understand fraud. So that's one part of it. But there's one more term which is very important to understand, which is that of misconduct. So Puneet, if you can just move to the next one, please. So misconduct is actually a very broader term, and it generally refers to violations of law, regulation, internal policy, or just simple, kind of expectations that one may have in terms of an ethical business conduct. So any activity which is a misconduct may not necessarily be a fraud. So in a way, what we are trying to say is fraud is a subset of misconduct. There are multiple kinds of misconduct which may happen. It could be corrupt misconduct, it could be collusive, it could be coercive, or it could also be obstructive in nature, right? So if suppose there is a investigation going on in an organization, and there are certain set of details which are expected to be shared by the relevant process or stakeholders, and they deliberately, knowingly do not share that set of information with the investigators, they are causing an obstruction in the investigation process, and which is why it gets termed under obstructive misconduct. Similarly, a coercive misconduct would be where two or more people, coercive would be where people try to impair or harm or threaten another person or property of another person to get their means done. So that is a coercive misconduct. So all of these are different examples of misconduct, but they do not necessarily mean a fraud. So that segregation is somewhat important when we get into forensic investigation, and which is why we thought at the outset we'll just put that out for everyone. Okay, moving to the next one, please. Okay, so what are the types of fraudulent misconduct? I think I kind of touched upon these already. Fraudulent misconduct we have already discussed. Corrupt is where obviously you try to kind of bribe someone or offer someone beyond what is right, and in a way leads to corrupt misconduct. Collusive is another kind of misconduct wherein two or more people actually work together for another person's gain or wrongfully take away something which was deservingly supposed to be in a particular place. So that is collusive. Coercive we have spoken about, and I think we have also discussed about obstructive. So we can move to the next one, please. This is a very interesting concept actually, and you may have come across this earlier as well, but I can tell you in all my investigations which I have done in my career, I have always found this principle to be very, very relevant. In 1951, Donald Cressy, a criminologist, actually developed this model, which is called as a fraud triangle, and it has three elements, okay, which is pressure, rationalization, and opportunity. What this principle really says is that what this theory says is that whenever there is an incident of fraud, you will always find these three elements present there. There will be some pressure. The perpetrator of fraud would be having some incentive to commit a fraud. This person will always try to rationalize his or her acts. So, whether it is, for example, the person may say that he or she believed that they deserved 20% of increment, but they got only 7. So, which is why they thought they'll make good of it through other means. Or they would say, they would quote certain unfortunate events. It could be health of a family member. It could be something which is beyond their control. Or it could be as vague as, losing some amount of money in a casino or something like that. So they will always rationalize, because X happened, it led me to do Y, which now falls under a fraudulent incident. And then the last one is actually opportunity. Now, even if there is a person who is under pressure and for some reason he or she can justify their dishonest actions, but if opportunity is not there, then it does not mean anything, right? A fraud can take place only when there is a particular level of process gap or a lack in controls, which actually is kind of identified by this person. And when all of these three elements, they come together, that is when typically, as per this theory, a fraud takes place. So that was until very recently, I would say. Later on, another element to this theory was added, which is capability. So, which is also a very fair thing if you look at it. If you have all three components, but the person who's there does not have the capability to exploit the opportunities, then it really doesn't mean something, because it also takes a lot of, I would say, heart to kind of get into things which are not on the right side of things. So this fourth element, when it gets together with these three, is called the fraud diamond theory. Okay. So now when we are done with some of the basics, let's move to the next slide, which is coming to our core, that what is a forensic investigation? Typically, this term is referred to the science or technology in the investigation for establishment of facts. It is a practice of lawfully establishing evidences and facts to be presented in the court of law. So I'm not saying that every investigation will end up being presented in the court of law, but when you do a forensic investigation, that is how your aptitude towards things should be. You should always work around stuff and with an assumption to an extent that tomorrow there could be a situation that this particular incident may be challenged in the court of law by any of the parties involved, right? You do an investigation, you end up identifying the perpetrator of fraud, you identify that this is the modus operandi, this is the amount which was siphoned off, these were the culprits who were hand in glove, and the organization which appointed you as a forensic investigator, they take some action and they kind of terminate the employment of these individuals. And later on, one of them or all of them could actually go to the court of law and file a case for wrongful termination. And there, the organization will obviously say that there was a forensic investigation which took place, and this is the report basis which we took certain actions. Now, that is an assumption which typically I would say, while in terms of practical application, I would say it doesn't happen as often. But you should always assume when you're doing a forensic investigation that that may actually happen at a later point of time. So that's an overarching view of what a forensic investigation is. Moving on. Okay, this is a very interesting slide and something which Nihar sir was also referring to. The lines between, the expectations from statutory auditors compared to the forensic auditors are actually getting blurred as we progress. It's unfortunate, but it appears that the old school saying of the auditors being a watchdog and not a bloodhound are being challenged to the T. And today the expectations are really that there should be nothing which should go outside the attention of the statutory auditors. So we just thought we'll put a slide here to kind of differentiate between what statutory audit, internal audit, and forensic audit do for the respective parameters. What are their objectives? What are some of the techniques? Who appoints them? What is the period? I guess for this audience, this is more or less still clearer, but typically this is a very relevant slide. I think the important part here is on the techniques and approach, which we will focus more on in the subsequent slides. We all know statutory audit refers to some of the substantive and compliance-based procedures, whereas internal audit is basically looking at the management policies and ensuring that they are appropriately implemented on ground, right? Whereas in a forensic audit, we look at the analysis of past trends, whether and their substantiveness, and we check if the selected transactions are done appropriately or not. And there are extensive procedures which do that, and there are various tools which we use for that, various methods which we use for that, and which we, like I said, discuss about it. Period, again, is something which obviously for statutory audit is very different. It refers to the accounting period. Internal audit is more like a perpetual thing which happens on a continuous basis, whereas a forensic audit may happen for any period of time as may be required. Okay. And in terms of reporting, again, the statutory audit report goes to the owners of the entity. Internal audit report goes to the management. And whereas the forensic audit report goes to those who have appointed the investigator, and this appointment can interestingly be done by any person, even a third party. So we have situations where regulators today are appointing forensic auditors for a particular incident to be looked at into in detail. So those are some of the brighter principles of difference between these three kind of interventions for a corporate entity. I'm sure all of us understand this better, so maybe we can just move to the next slide, please. Okay, so now when we have understood the basis of fraud, how does it happen, what are the parameters, and we also looked at some of the brighter lines between the kind of interventions our profession can bring in, and we have also looked at the triangle theory and all of that. So now, what are the kind of investigations that one can do under this service? So yes, there is typical fraudulent financial reporting, which is being investigated by chartered accountants largely. Then there are also certain misconduct and ethical issues, conflict of interests, white collar crimes, manipulation of funds, diversion of funds, siphoning of funds, bribery and corruption. So all of these are some of very good examples of what is typically being investigated by forensic auditors in today's day and time. This is a very interesting and evolving subject because as we progress, I always refer to this as a cat and mouse game. We will find, unfortunately so, we will find that the perpetrators of fraud typically end up a step ahead of, whatever controls an organization may define. But that is where, the challenges. And with new technologies and, unexpected disruptions like the pandemic, this field has become even more interesting. We had a situation around 2 years back wherein nobody was prepared for remote working and remote basis controls on their all procedures, and suddenly we were sitting at home and doing stuff, right? So it was obviously an opportunity for people who would have wanted to do certain unfortunate activities, and it did happen as well. We did see a lot of increase in terms of the frauds being reported. And having said that, that's where we also have to evolve. We also learn from all engagements which we do, and that's where the challenge of this particular service is. Moving to the next slide, please. So with that, we thought it will be interesting for us to share what really are the nuances of forensic investigation methodology. We thought it will be interesting for all of you to hear and understand. With this, I'll request my colleague Puneet to please take over and run through the slides on this particular section.
Thank you, Saurabh. I hope I'm clearly audible.
Yes.
Great. So, just a question for Bharat or the ICI team. How many members do we have at the moment?
I think I do not have the access to all the members who are there. I think Amit sir would be able to answer that.
Okay. But they can put their questions in the chat box, right?
Yeah. No. We have there's the DAP portal where they would be posting their questions, and around 7:15, 7:10, 7:15 we would be discussing. I mean, after your session, we would be discussing those questions.
Thank you. So I encourage all to put their put your questions in the chat box. We can take them. So that we can all gain from this session. Now, just to begin with, what is the purpose of an investigation? It is usually carried out to answer these 5 questions, right? What has happened? How did it happen? Who was involved? What is the quantum? And how do we plug the gaps? क्या हुआ? कैसे हुआ? किसने किया? कितना अमाउंट इन्वॉल्व था? एंड कौन कौन से इंटरनल कंट्रोल्स यूज करके ये फ्रॉड हुआ? Now, every investigation has a story. Unless and until we are able to, at the end of the investigation, convey a story about the investigation, our procedures are not complete. However, if we are able to answer these 5 questions about what has happened, how it has happened, who are the people who were involved, it could be individual, it could be collective, like Saurabh mentioned, collusion of people, what is the quantum, and how do we plug the gaps? Now, what were the internal controls which can be improved? Now, as we know, if we see a general profile of a fraudster, that person would have spent sufficient time in the system. He would be able to understand the internal controls that are there in an organization, and would be also knowing the loopholes, right? And once he is aware of the loopholes and he has the capability to do it, tying it back with the fraud triangle, if there's a pressure on him, which could be financial in nature, he has the opportunity because he knows the controls, and then he can rationalize it, saying that he was not paid well, or he would have returned the money, right? So with that concept, let us move forward and understand what is investigation methodology. This is a 5x5 approach or a 5-step approach, which includes planning and preparation, information gathering, analysis and interpretation, interviews, and reporting. Although we have mentioned it is a step-by-step approach, these are also interlinked. For example, अगर आपने कोई information gather करी है, उसको analyze करी है, and then also interviewed somebody. That during the interview, it could be scenario wherein a person had introduced a new theory to you, or a new evidence that he has brought out, or a new issue that he has highlighted. Then again, you will go back and gather information, right? So these are interlinked to each other, and you may have to move between one step to another and keep coming back unless and until you are able to answer those 5 questions, and at the same time you are able to convey the story of the incident. Now let us look at them each one by one. So what is planning and preparation? It includes at the start, identify the issue in consideration. What is the issue? Who is involved? Secondly, who is the client? Who are the stakeholders? The stakeholders could be other than the client as well. For example, you need to identify at this stage whether the stakeholder could also be a law enforcement agency, or the stakeholder could also be the investors, although you have signed an engagement letter with the general counsel, right? So you need to identify the stakeholders as well. You need to understand the allegation in question, which could have come from a whistleblower or a general complaint. You need to ascertain what tools and technologies are required in this investigation, whether you need to deploy some of the data analytics tools, some of the forensic technology tools to gather the electronic data. We need to also discuss the reporting structure at this stage. How do you want to report to the client, in the sense that what about the frequency of the updates? So all of these come at this stage. In addition to these, you also need to ensure that you are independent as an auditor, as an investigator. There is no conflict of interest, either with the client or with the target. You are absolutely clear in terms of going ahead. At this stage itself, we need to also identify and also preserve the information that we require. That would come from the hypothesis that we build. So at this stage, after understanding what is the allegation in nature, who is involved, who is the client, right? Who are the stakeholders? And after getting some understanding of the processes, you will start building a hypothesis at this stage. A hypothesis is a modus operandi, a potential modus operandi, which has been used by the suspect to do this incident or a fraud on the company or on any person. Basis the hypothesis, you will identify the information that is required, right? So these are some of the steps that you need to perform, as well as will also prepare the work plan, which would include all that we have spoken about in terms of the information that is required. Also, ideal work plan also includes the timelines, when you will do what, right? So a detailed work plan would include the procedures that you have identified to be performed, also the information that is required from the company, and also the timelines that you need to follow. So let us look at this. This is just reiterating what we have discussed. First is understand the nature and detail. Secondly, identify the whistleblower, whether we need to reach it out or already we have reached out to get more information. Sometimes what happens is the whistleblower may not give all the information at the first instance. It could also be, he is also scared because there could be a scenario of retaliation or a fear of retaliation. Now he would test the waters, with certain information, giving certain information to the company to see what happens. Our experience shows that the whistleblower can have additional evidence or additional information which could help the investigator. So always prefer to go back to the whistleblower and seek more information. Of course, the primary is to protect his identity, which is the whistleblower protection, right? Then, like I said, preparing the work plan, identifying the sources from where information would come from, and then preserving and securing the data to ensure it is not tampered with. Also at this stage, evaluate if we need to bring the lawyers into the picture, because some of the allegations would be very, depending on the nature of allegation, I would say, whether we need to involve a law firm or not, can we also be evaluated at this stage. So these are some of the steps that are mentioned, which we have already discussed. clarity on the allegation and the parties involved, purpose of the investigation, what is the objective you're trying to establish, who are the stakeholders. The very important point, what are restrictions, which could be, technical, which could be around data, which could be around geography. There could be geographic restriction. You cannot go to that geography because it's highly sensitive. There could also be challenge in terms of the data. The organization is not maintaining the data for the period under review. All of these need to be identified. What are the tools and technologies required? For example, the data analytics tools as well as the forensic technology tools. Will come to that. Whether there are issues relating to business continuity. You work with the organization and see, whether there could be a scenario where the business could be affected. For example, let's take example of a telecom site, the passive infra that is allows the network to continue. Now, if there is a threat to the passive infrastructure that would come down, that would means the entire bandwidth would come down, right? So you need to assess whether there is any risk to the business continuity with respect to the suspect, the hypothesis and the primary work steps that need to be tested, the preservation and the identifying the motive, right? That is the, and also the what can be the modus operandi. Now let's look at the information gathering, the second bucket. The information could pertain to people. It could pertain to the documents, right? It could pertain to the electronic data or hard copy documents, right? And the third party information. Now with what do we mean by electronic information? While doing a normal transaction audit, we generally look at the documents pertain to the transaction. Or in a forensic investigation, there is an element of using what we call as forensic technological tools to get the electronic data. That's a forensic copy of the data, which is backed by the hash value. The data which is said to be electronic information could be emails, could be your chats, could be the user files or sitting on the desktop or the laptop or the suspect. All of this can become an evidence if it is forensically gathered. Hard copy documents, which could be around the supporting documents like the agreements, invoices, proof of work, etc. Then information can also be gathered from people. You need to identify who are the witnesses, who are the process owners, gather information from them, identify them, see whether there's any restriction to approaching them. And then there's third-party information, which could be, information residing in the public domain, right? For example, for companies, there's, very great detail which is available with the Ministry of Corporate Affairs. Likewise, there are few information databases which are subscribed or free. For example, Google. Right. So a lot of information resides in them. There can be also social media checks. That is, your Facebook, LinkedIn, and so on and so forth. All of that needs to be, are the sources from which information is gathered. Then comes the reviewing part of it, which includes the data analytics. Now, generally, we have been using MX Excel as a primary tool to, manipulate the data. When I say manipulate, it means to work around the data. However, if the data size is large, Excel has a restriction of 10 lakh rows, right? If the data is very huge, then there are tools available in the market. The most common one is SQL. It's a structured query language. And it does not have any restriction. There are also tools for visualization, which are, Power BI, Tableau, etc. Then there are platforms like Python and, and then programming languages like R. However, these are the tools which are available and there are specific skill sets people with skill sets who can use them. For example, in a practice like ours, we would have people who are from CA background. We have people who are from, technology background, the BTech, and people who have the skills of SQL and Power BI, etc. So all of them come together and do an investigation, right? Then also we have, MBAs, lawyers within the team to see, from a different lens as well. So collectively, it forms a forensic team, right? People bringing in different skill set to the table. Now, the data analytics can also be, what you can perform data analytics. Of course, you can perform it on the transaction data, but also there are few, regular checks that we can do. For example, the vendor master with the employee master basis certain commonalities, such as PAN number, for example. Then you can see whether PAN is standardized or not, but, since the PAN has a numeric, etc. So you can check the sanctity of these, right? There can also be system logs, who has made an entry at what time, whether it's outside working hours or, within working hours, whether it's during the weekends. Those outliers can also be identified, right? You can do trend analysis of salaries paid to employees at the same level, etc. So a lot of things can be performed through data analytics on various data sets, which could be your accounting data, which could be the other data that is relying with the company. Some of the illustrative red flags that can be identified is, like I said, the same address or PAN for different vendors, PAN not in standard format, right? Time taken to make the payment, which is, you're making advance payment to a certain vendor. But in one of the cases, what we noted was that there's a entire process for making a payment to a vendor. However, there are also exception that in case of an urgency, you can make an advance payment. What we identified was that the exception became a norm, right? There were more advance payments to a vendor rather than a standard process of making a payment, right? So that was abuse, and that's what identified basis the data analytics that we perform, right? So sometimes the exceptions become a norm in a company. That's where, these kind of issues come up. Then, payments processed at non-working hours, date and time stamps, etc. Right. So these are some of the red flags that can come out. So these are some of the methods that can be applied in data analytics. Now, gap assessment, where there are missing check numbers, pattern where you can see that payments were made to certain vendor on a certain day or during the month end, etc. Cluster, it could be geographical, giving you insights about particular geography, particular vendor type, all those, and duplication, making two payments for the same vendor. Outlier, you are able to see that the working hours of a company are fixed. However, there are certain payments being made or at irregular hours. Right? Time series analysis, difference between, for example, there's a mechanism of seeking 3 quotations from vendors before awarding work. You can see that, there is very little time between the emails of L2 and L1, right? So all these can be identified through data analytics. And these are some of the methods. Then comes the document review. See, for any investigation, whatever that we identified through data analytics, whatever that we identified through other procedures, which could be public domain searches, which could include your electronic data review. At the end of the day, you have to go back and see the source documents, which could include the agreement, the invoices, the purchase orders, purchase acquisitions, etc. Right? Even you have performed the data analytics on the entire transaction data. You identified certain outliers. However, you still need to go back and see those documents. Right? So what are the red flags that can come through the review of the documents? This mismatch in description of services. We look at all these examples. There could be same handwriting or similar signatures in different invoices, missing authorizations, overwritten and altered documents. Documents not in chronological order. Your serial number of one invoice is, which has come after is lower than the other, which has come later. Let's look at some of these examples. So if you see this, the agreement on the left-hand side says that the service is for consultancy on statutory compliances and other regulatory matters, requirements. Right? When you see the invoice, it is around branding and design. So these are not matching to each other, right? So then it's an additional red flag that has come out. We will see the concept called triangulation of information, right? That is information gathered through different sources rather, be it electronic data review, be it your document review, be it public domain searches, and then, seeing everything put together, right? That's called triangulation. So we look at it, there's a mismatch in description. Then we say, the vendor is not existing at this address. You have performed some site visits. We have looked at, there is no presence of the vendor in the public domain, right? So all these red flags come together. You see that the payment has been made, right? Which is in round figures. The people who are signing the contract or the invoice, do not seem to have any social media profile. So all these come together end of the day and say, you conclude whether, you think it's a fraudulent transaction or not. That concept is called triangulation. Then there's altered documents. So if you see, there's the overwriting of amount. There was a case wherein we were investigating. So the company had a process to manually write down the payments made to, or the invoices for different invoices and payments made to different vendors. We could see there's a lot of overwriting in those registers. When they are written back to back, you can do some analysis, putting the paper up, but there's a technology to decipher the handwriting as well. There are people available in the market to do that, right? Who have the capability to decipher the overwritten figures. So what's written beneath the overwritten figures? There were fluids. For example, here there's a fluid, and then you can see there's something has been overwritten, right? So all these can be deciphered using technology. There are people in the market who can do that for you, right? So these, overwritings and all, what was the original, you can identify. And these can, the report of the expert who decipher, stand before the court of law, right? So he has sufficient, just ensure that he has sufficient experience, and there are, vendors with sufficient experience who can do that for you. And the court will, will stand before the court of law. Then the forged documents, you can, see same contact numbers for different vendors, same authorized signatory for different vendors. All of these are, indicators that, these two vendors can, could be related to each other, or there could be a scenario double invoicing, right? Then missing authorizations. There's nowadays there are a lot of computer generated invoices, right? So we need to be careful. They may not contain the signatures, but there's a way to also identify whether that has been created by someone. For example, you can right click it and you can identify who created that PDF and when it was created or last modified, right? It is much more, I would say it will perform much better when it's a Word file. There could be certain limitations with the PDF as well. And again, these are only indications, right? There could be a scenario wherein, for example, if you see the properties, let's suppose there's an allegation on the IT department head that he has onboarded his own vendors. right? You have been carrying out investigation. You have also seized his laptop, and you identified that there are certain invoices. Now those invoices can also come through the email for pre-verification, but you need to see the document properties, who has created that, who last modified it, right? Those will throw certain facts before you. So overwritten, altered documents, these are some of the documents not in chronological order, right? One is 1284 dated 26, the other is 1289 dated 1410, right? So they are not in chronological order. The next element is public domain search. So there's a lot of information residing in the public domain, right? Those, like I said, could be freely available, like Google, which is a database on its own, and there are also subscribed databases which crawl through various websites and identify the information for you, right? The databases can also be if you take subscription, some of the databases could also be outside the geography. They'll be able to give you information for specific regions as well. For example, UAE, Hong Kong, etc. So those are separate, databases which you can identify and also subscribe for it. What can be determined through public domain research? One is very elementary question about existence of a party. You can see whether the party exists or not, whether the registration details, the GST number is actually pertaining, is whether that's real or not, whose name the GST number is registered. There's a lot of information, even through the government website, that we can identify. You can identify the adverse press or news articles against a certain person or party, right? You can also see whether that person or party was involved in any integrity issues in the past, whether there's affiliation to any political party, the politically exposed person, as we call it, PEP. Identify the source of funding and related party relationship. Like I said, there's a lot of information that is residing with MCA as well. For companies, we can definitely get that information. Then any instance of unethical practices in the past, the infrastructure as well. Along with public domain, this is a very important and basis which we are able to actually identify whether a business exists or not, which is the site visits. These are conducted by specialized people, and also the market inquiries bit. Those are performed by specialized people. I would not advise people who are inexperienced to actually go in the market and seek, do some inquiries about certain people, right? We need to be careful as well there. So how to conduct searches? Now, if you make a general search of pharma consulting, it will give us news of pharma and consulting as well, right? If we quote it together, pharma consulting, it will only give us the search results where these two words are coming together. So it will restrict. Then there are other operators like and, or, and not, etc. All this is available, freely available. You can go back and search more about it, how to efficiently use these operators while doing some of the searches. Because, like I said, there's a lot of data or information available in public domain, which can be junk as well, right? So we need to be careful while getting that information how efficiently as well. Then the analysis and interpretation, like here the concept of triangulation comes into picture. We discuss that there are 5 steps. First is planning and preparation. Second is gathering information. Third is analysis. Then interviews, and then reporting. Now, at that time, at the time of planning and preparation, when we had some bit of understanding of the hypothesis of the case, we built a hypothesis. Now, over the course of investigation, we have been testing that hypothesis through various information that we have gathered through electronic data, through your document review, through the outside approach, which is public domain site visits, through talking to employees, etc. So there are various sources that we have employed. Now we need to test whether that hypothesis stays or not. If the hypothesis is tested but is not able to sustain, then you need to see whether what is the missing link, then rebuild the hypothesis. That's a continuous process as we do the investigation, right? As we get more information, more understanding about the case, the hypothesis keeps on building. It cannot be just one hypothesis. It could be multiple hypotheses that we have built and we are going to test during the course of investigation. Now, when we combine all the information evidence that we have gathered through various sources, that's called triangulation of information. If at this stage, you are able to answer those 5 questions, who has done that? What has happened? Who has done that? How it had happened? What is the amount involved? And 5th, what were the internal controls abused and how can we plug them? Right? If we are able to do that, then we can go to the next stage of report writing. Right? So although triangulation is mentioned here, this triangulation information would also include the information that is gathered through the interviews. Right? Like I said, those 5 stages, apart from reporting, those 4 stages are kind of interlinked. You may have to go back from one stage to the other stage. Next is the interviews, right? Just to recapitulate, just to go back and so these are the 5 steps: planning, preparation, information gathering, analysis, interpretation, interviews, and reporting. What I have said is, although we have mentioned triangulation at step 3, it would include the information that you have gathered through, interviewing the witnesses, the process owners. Could be also the first round of, also the, of course, whistleblower. The 4th is, of course, the target as well, right? So whatever that information that you have gathered, you triangulate that from at this stage, and then go to the reporting if you are able to answer the hypothesis, right? So let's look at interviews as a step. Just stay with me. One more. Yeah. So interviews can be of 2 types. One is information seeking interviews, which you want to, like the word says, information seeking. The idea is to get information, right? That information could be from the process owner, could be from the witness, could be from the whistleblower, or also could be from the suspect. The second is the admission seeking interviews. Now it may look very, as investigators, we think that we have been empowered, but we need to also understand we may not have all the powers, right? So admission seeking interviews, are generally, done by the police and the LEAs, right? Although in our private investigations, we do, these admission seeking interviews, but they may not, whatever interviews that we have conducted or sought, if we have been able to even seek admission, they may not stand before the court of law, because we do not, anything that been said to us is not, only few agencies or few, even the police, like I said, the admission even before the police may not sustain before the court, right? Leave about us. So for internal purposes of the company, these may be, used as an evidence to take an action, but in the court of law, it may not stand, right? Then interview has to be structured as a free-flowing, I would say in a free-flowing manner. It has to be from the outside in approach. You start first by building a rapport with the interviewee, get more information about his background, ask general questions about background, what you do, what's your education, where were you before and when did you join? What is your, role in the company? Make him comfortable, right? Make him speak more, because he, he could be this, people do not face investigators day in, day out, right? We need to make them comfortable. And even before starting these questions, the first thing should be telling them why they are here, right? So once we are able to build the rapport, then we can get to the process understanding bit, about if the process has been abused, get more understanding on his knowledge about the processes in the company or procedure or practices in the company. And then you come to the specific questions, right? So first build rapport, ask generic questions so that, he starts speaking more, then come to the process level or procedure level questions, and then come to the specific questions, right? That's how an interview should be structured, in a free flowing manner. Of course, by free flowing we mean it may not, you may not build a list of questions, right, and then start asking one question after the other. So while talking to that interviewee, if we take you to a different direction, you move in that direction, and then you come back, right? Instead of questions, you can make, pointers, and you can come back once that has been explored, right? Then what are the characteristics of a effective interview that we have, brought out here? Strong interpersonal skills. Like I said, you need to build rapport with the interviewee. Quick analytical skills. You need to also understand what he is trying to say, where he is trying to lead, right? If he's taking you to another direction that you're not envisaged, you go there and, explore that. And if you think it's kind of derailing the process, you come back to the main issue, right? Structured in non-executory manner. Like I said, we do not have the powers of the law enforcement. We are there as the professionals to do our job, right? Calm and composed. We have seen instances where, the interviewer gets a bit heated up. You may have sufficient evidence with you. However, there could be a scenario wherein the interview is the suspect is not willing to accept those, right? Or the interview is not answering you what you want him to answer, right? In those tough situations, we need to remain calm and composed. Then the next is good listener and observer, right? The idea of interview is to make the other person speak more, right? Not to speak more, rather than make the interview speak more. So you need to be a good listener, right? That's how you're going to gather more information. Also observe how is he behaving. Is he getting nervous on certain, when you talk about certain things? There could be, small behavioral patterns that you can observe. Asking the right follow-up questions. That is very important, right? If you have a certain structure in your mind saying that, I'm going to ask A, then B, then C, then you may miss what he is trying to lead you, and you may not ask the right follow-up question. Then objectivity. Here, it means that, we need to remain objective, right? We cannot say that, in our mind as an investigator, if we say, X is guilty, and we are interviewing him with that intent and that in our mind that, he is guilty, so it may lead to you losing that objectivity as an investigator. Then not to appear a threat to the interview, right? You need to build that rapport and you need to get information. The idea is to get information, right? So we need to build that rapport with him, not to appear to, threaten him, with your words or actions.
Puneet, if may I just add a couple of things here?
Sure.
So, very importantly, and I know there are maybe another couple of slides on interview skills as even pending as of now, but 2-3 very important things. Okay. See, one needs to appreciate that none of us are trained interviewers, right? We don't do this as a profession, and interviewing is a very interpersonal skill. It comes to you with time and with experience. it will definitely not be advisable that if one has not done this in the past, then you straight away jump into it and lead a discussion. Perhaps what we typically do is we always when we do these discussions, we have maybe a junior team member also alongside, and perhaps this person for the first few interviews can only focus on note making, but also look at how this discussion is conducted. It is more of an art rather than a science. And there are 2, 3 very basic checkpoints. Okay. So, like Puneet already kind of established, that one of the very important elements in an interview is actually to prepare very well, right? You may meet all kinds of people. Trust me on that. There will be people who will, at the drop of the hat, start crying. Okay, as if what has happened, and what really you have asked. They will really put you off with their behavior. They may sound very arrogant, or they may try to push certain agendas on you which are really not relevant for the purpose of the investigation, but they will try to do that. So what is important for us there is that we maintain our composure, we remain focused to our agenda, and by that what I mean is, let the person complete what they want to do. That's fine. You stick to your agenda and your questionnaire. Even if, as a part of an answer, the individual on the other side tries to digress you to a different planet altogether, that's okay. Go to that other planet, but come back to your agenda. That is very important. If you have not prepared well, chances are either you will run out of patience and say, just stop it there, I don't want to listen any of it. Or when you go to that planet, you will just stay there and you'll never be able to come back, and you will forget where were we. So, which is why this preparation element of an interview is actually of utmost importance, and the timing of it as well. So, when I say timing, there are 2 perspectives to that. One, um, you can do typically a discussion at the beginning before you really get into your procedures. And then, when you have got all your evidences or all your, I would say, documents and transactions in your hand, then you have one shot at the end. It is not something which you can run in days and keep on, meeting every other day, because then, the other person also gets smarter by the day, right? He or she will also speak to 10 other people and get some more insights to digress you rather than to focus on what our agenda is. And the other important time perspective element is, do not rush with the agenda. It's you should always have the patience that, okay, if we are sitting here for 2 hours, it may so happen it may take 3.5 hours. That's absolutely okay. What is more important is you meet your objectives. Now, yes, there would be sometimes a situation where you're meeting a very senior person, and perhaps you won't have a window of more than 10-15 minutes beyond what is designated. So in that case, you need to be smart enough to ensure, if the person is digressing, you politely bring them back to the agenda. We understand, we appreciate, you have done a lot of good work. There are things where you have contributed in a lot of detail. The organization has benefited from it. But for the purpose of this discussion, we need to come back to this particular aspect. And that's how you bring the focus back to where you want to lead it to, right? And maybe the last but the most important thing is always be respectful. There are ample instances and examples where the other person took advantage of the investigator running out of patience, and the agenda then was of not being respectful in the organization, not being treated well, or being mentally harassed and whatnot. We do not want an investigation to lead into another investigation, which is just a nuisance value, right? So we need to be very careful of how we articulate our questions, how we tone our questions, how do we modulate our voice. Nowhere we can be disrespectful to that individual. One needs to appreciate, while we may have n number of documents or evidences which we believe that are actual evidences to even jail the person and take him behind bars, that does not mean we can raise our voice, we can go aggressive, or we can go thumping our foot down that, okay, no, we know you have done this and you are guilty. We are not the judges by any stretch of imagination. As an investigator, we are only focused on finding facts. Until the time you remain focused on that, I think you will end up doing a great job at it. Preet, back to you.
Yeah, thank you, Saurabh. And just to add there, few important points. One is, if you're interviewing a woman colleague, do ensure, there's a woman present in the room as well. right? We have seen instances where there were issues post, such scenarios. So, that's advisable. Second is, like Saurabh mentioned, always have a team who make the notes. If you are making the note, ensure that, you're making the note from the beginning, right? Don't just start making the note when he says something important. That would, put something in the mind of the interview that he has made a point and that's important for you, right? So these are small things that we need to be careful about. And also, in general, if you have team members, one plays a good cop and second plays a bad cop, right? Depending on the situation. These are small things that assist you in meeting the objectives of the interview as well. So moving from there, like Saurabh mentioned, there is no standard methodology in India, right? This is something which is based on the approach which is widely accepted in UK. It's called a peace interviewing approach. It includes these 5 elements, which is around planning and preparation. You plan an interview, organize your documents that on which you want to rely upon, have a set of pointers prepared, engage and explain, build rapport, like we discussed, build rapport with the interviewee, make him comfortable, engaging into conversation. Then account, clarification, compare and contrast. Based on certain scenarios, you make him, for example, if there's an allegation of misconduct, right? Throw him a situation. How would he react, if something like that happened, right? So use scenarios while, getting information from people. Then, basis their account and then closure at this stage, you always ensure that you always close the interview with an open ending, and so that you can always go back to that person, right? Don't close the window for always, right? Tell him that if there's something else, we'll always, bother you again. Then evaluation, whether you have met the objectives of the engagement of the interview, right? So this is a very good approach. You can go back and search more about it, and this will actually help in improving your skill set in interviews. Then what are the typologies? Then there's introduction questions. Asking him general questions about his background, his family, his previous employer, etc. Then there's questions which could be open questions, which can have a very narrative answer. Then closed questions, the yes, no. It's always advisable to have open questions so that, make the interview speak more, right? Leading questions to lead him to certain facts. You're giving an indication, so you lead him into a certain arriving at a certain factual information. Negative questions. So these are, some of the questions, but typically in interview, we rather have open questions, which are more around, getting more information. Those closed questions can be only to specifics where, you want to ascertain a specific situation, right? Then there are assessment questions, extracting information specific to the matter, analyze the verbal and non-verbal cues that he is giving. Evaluate admissions he can review is required at this stage. Then there are closing questions, right? Always close on a positive note, saying that, you may again reach out to the person if further information is required. That's very important. Reconfirm the facts, right? What he has told you, reconfirm that, and ideally ensure that minutes of the meeting are prepared then and there only. And, if a signature needs to be obtain it, on that specific day itself, right? So, ensure these small things, and, you will be able to, get good output from your interview objectives. Some of the do's and don'ts. make interview comfortable. Like I said, again, building rapport, etc. On more important is the don'ts, right? We have
I
talked
think
about the
we
do's.
can skip this one. I'm just a
Okay.
little cognizant of time. We have covered this in our verbatim, so
Sure,
maybe
sure.
to the next
I
one.
can see Bharat, so even more. Bharat, do we have questions?
Yeah, we have a few
Great.
questions. You can wrap up in like next 2-3 minutes, and then we can start with the questions.
Sure. Thank you. So this is why we have done the investigation, the reporting stage of it. Ideally, the report should say whether the allegation is substantiated or not. If you're able to, answer those 5 questions, build a story, allegation is substantiated, or otherwise it remains unsubstantiated. First, it did not occur. The allegation was false. Secondly, you could not arrive at a certain conclusion because lack of documents, lack of access to people, etc. Right? So there could be these 2 scenarios. There is no standard report structure, although ICI is coming up with the guidance note, which lays down the structure of the report, right? It's still in the making, still in the process of discussions. It only gives you a rough structure, and there is no standard structure. It all depends on the professional how he wants to convey. But there are certain elements in a report. Rather, it's a matter of different. Maybe it requires a different session in itself. These are some of the objectives, right? To ensure that the investigation was carried out in a procedural and fair manner, right? To knit together a story and to provide the intended audience with the necessary information. So going back to the planning stage, you have identified your stakeholders. Does the report meet the objective of the stakeholders or not, right? We're trying to answer those in the reporting stage. Quickly, these are some of the key pointers regarding the content in the language, right? Clear, concise, and complete. A forensic report needs to be concise. It cannot run into pages, right? It needs to be concise, to the point, factual, right? You need not give your opinion. Your opinion should not form part of the report. It has to be factual. Then British language, impartial, active, simple, consistent. These are some of the pointers that will help you while writing the reports. Just to introduce to the forensic standards, I think we can skip this slide. So ICI has come out with FAIS, forensic and investigation standards. Those are recommendatory in nature, and at this stage, they are, the team is making guidance notes. So the standards answers the what part of it, and the guidance note will answer the how part of it. If you see the list, it's pretty exhaustive, broken down into a number of standards. Each and every standard contains details about what needs to be done while applying the standard. Right now, like I said, it's a recommendatory stage, and of course, it's brought by the ICI member, ICI. So it is right now. It is recommended for the ICI members, right? So 100 series, 200 series, 300, 400, all with different objectives, right? The key features of FAI standards: they are principle based. They are applying the providing scope of professional judgment. They answers the what part of it, like I mentioned, and these standards will be made mandatory on members of ICI. So right now it's recommended. There may be a stage where they may become mandatory. So yes, Bharat, we can now move to the question and answers.
Yes, very, very informative session. Very, very information packed with, in just 1 hour, you have covered too many concepts in a very good way. So I congratulate you on that. So very nice session. I hope okay. So you were also asking about the number of people. So I got the information from DAB, around 450 people have joined. And so I have a few questions, which I will, the relevant ones I will read through. Okay, this is from Mukesh Kumar Sharma from Ghaziabad. No, this is okay. Just a second. Okay, I'll just go through the question.
Sure.
Is it recommended to seek permission of the interviewee to video, audio, record discussions? This is from Sandeep from Pune.
Very, very good question, actually. Anything which you do in an interview, okay, in fact, video recording or audio recording stands for no value, legally speaking, if you have not seeken prior consent. That's the golden rule for that. If you have not taken permission, then it just stands for nothing. In fact, one of the other things which Puneet also covered was like when we say that this has to be respectful and very detail oriented. You have to make the environment also very amiable. The person cannot feel that he's confined to a room. If the person wants to go out, have a coffee break, a tea break, go to use a washroom, it's all okay. You have to enable that this person can move out and do all of that. So definitely, if you're recording, it is it can be perceived as infringement of privacy if you have not taken due permissions.
Right. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. So I'll go to the next question. Sir, whether affidavit can be taken during interviews, step if required, whether interview can be recorded. Okay, this is the same question. Can we ask the target employee to share his and his family bank account statements to prove acceptance of bribes during the interview?
Okay,
very specific.
That's a very practical question as well. See, obviously, when you are in an investigation and you're interviewing a person in today's time, nobody as foolish, to accept certain benefits in their own bank accounts. And not just bank accounts. In fact, these digital wallets are also one of the very popular modes in today's time, right? So while you may focus all your energies on the bank account, you may be missing on the Paytm wallet or the likes, right? Now, coming to the specific question, it really depends on how beautifully you can articulate the requirement. One needs to explain in the first place that why do you need it? And why is it required? You need to have enough. You can't just go all out and say, because I'm asking, because I'm the interviewer and you are the target, now give me your family's bank account details. It doesn't work like that. You will have to build and knit the background towards it that, okay, listen, we have these 3, 4, 5 red flags which indicate that something is wrong. Now, it is in your interest. If you believe that you want to come out of it straight and clean, these are the 4 things which you need to do. And yes, one of those things could be, personal details of his or her family members, but then it has to be voluntary. You cannot push or force yourself into that requirement. If the person says he or she is not comfortable doing it, that's the end of story. You want to add something?
Okay.
Nothing. Sorry, you covered. Yeah.
Okay, so I think I'll just take one more question. Because there are other than questions, there are many just comments. This is a nice session, and such comments are there mostly. Okay, so there is this question from Ritesh from Mumbai. Should we record the confession of the target post interview in writing, in his own handwriting, or on email, or should we summarize and send for confirmation? What if target refuses to respond?
Again, a very practical question, and I think that's a challenge which all of us face. See, typically, by the time you reach the end of the discussion, okay, and as typically what I have seen, at least in my experience, if you really end up a discussion where you need this kind of a confession, it would be a good long discussion, right? And after that, the minute you get into writing stuff, okay, it can take more time. So you have to be cognizant of, how this person is feeling, what is the environment in which you are, is it taxing or is it somewhere, where you are in a comfortable situation? And then if all of those checks are right, then obviously you can get into detail of, asking what you want it to be written. Now, you can go to as much of length and ask this person to write. And I'm saying, even if the person agrees to write a verbatim from you on what you need in terms of your investigation report to summarize that, okay, this person did X, Y, Z, and these are the evidences which he or she has confessed and agreed that, yes, this happened. At the end of the day, my friend, it has only limited use. For the purposes of your report, yes, it is all good to go. But as per the law of the land, it is definitely something which can be challenged at a later date as well. So it solves some purpose, but that purpose, to my mind, is limited in nature.
Right, sir. Right, sir. I think these are the most relevant questions that we had for you. Uh, uh, so we would like to thank you for sharing this very useful information. And as I'd already commented, there was a lot of very useful practical information in just that 1 hour that both of you spoke for. I'm hoping that all the participants were keenly listening and grasping as much as they could. And okay, there was somebody who had also asked if they could get the PPT for your the session that you had. So I think you could respond to that also, if
We can
that could
coordinate
be.
on that.
Yeah.
But just one thing which I'd like to leave as a message before we close this, and I know we are on top of the time.
Right.
I have just one request for everyone. See, forensic investigation is a very interesting subject, and all of us inherently, we want to get into it and do some stuff which is, as I would say, intriguing. But just one, caution there. As a particular employee of a particular organization, or even as a professional who does only this day in day out for your bread and butter, uh, we should ensure that we never step ahead of ourselves. We are not the Sherlocks of the world. Okay, our powers, our skills are limited in nature, and let's be respectful of each individual. In our passion or zest to get the thing unlocked, the entire fraud theory unlocked, it is very easy to step into zones which are legally not correct, and that is one thing which is very, very important. On the contrary, and in fact, it could also happen that you may develop certain personal equations which may make things very difficult for you. If the other person realizes that you are stepping out of your zone just to get a kick out of it, and it is none of your business, then you may create equations which may make it not really comfortable for you individually speaking. So let's be very careful of what our scope is. Even as a professional, if you're investigating something, look at your scope and stick to it. That is something which will always give you protection and comfort that you're doing the right thing. That's
right, sir. So there was also somebody who was actually talking about. So I actually did not find it that relevant, but since you just spoke about it, so there was somebody who was talking about that as forensic accountants, people develop this skill related to frauds, and then they become creative accountants, which is like it's just the black and white side of the same coin, the heads and tail of the same coin. So if there is some kind of regulation, some kind of, so I mean that is not relevant for our subject, but yeah, on very same lines. So
it's very simple. If you're tired of being an investigator and you want to feel how it is to be on the other side, please go ahead and get as creative and innovative as you want.
And just to add that, agar karna hai fraud, to bada karna. Right?
Yeah. No, I think it's
okay.
Always, easy to get digressed, but let's be, be responsible professionals and do the best for ourselves, our organizations, and the country.
Right. I feel both of them have the same skill requirement, but it is of course again based on all your morals and ethics.
Right.
So that is what that side we choose is all upon us. So thank you so much, sir. Both of you, thank you, Puneet, thank you, Saurabh, thank you for being here and sharing your expertise, your knowledge with all the participants. So I thank you on behalf of DAB and SAFA for this event. Thank you. So I will just thank you. Yes, right, sir. Bye. So I will just introduce the next speaker because we are running short of time. So we'll just start with Sarabjit sir. So Sarabjit sir has 20 plus years of experience in managing all aspects of risk management, auditing, cyber security, fraud investigations, and management assurance. Experience with global organizations and big four consulting firms in managing large-scale result-oriented business, and part of surpassing and has been played a part in surpassing the growth targets. So Sarabjit sir will be talking about the fraud control framework. Over to you, sir.
I hope this presentation is visible and I am audible.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You're visible. The presentation visible and you're audible.
Sure. Thank you very much, and thanks to Nihar and Mr. Nanda for giving us this opportunity to talk about fraud controls framework and setting the context about why this is needed, considering the expectations of the society, the regulators which are there now. We also heard from Saurabh the standards which are coming up on ICAI as well as by the regulators on forensic prevention as well as on the framework. We also discussed about the definition of fraud, why the fraud is happening, what are the parameters, uh, or what are the fraud triangles which result into having a fraud in the organization or somebody committing the fraud, which was the opportunity, the pressure, and the rationalization of that. I think considering that, I would like to discuss about how we can have the governance framework around it and what we should do to prevent it or minimize it. We have already heard about how the detection or how the investigation can be done once this fraud has happened. But as an organization, what can we do to either prevent it or minimize it? Is what I will talk about for next 45 minutes to 1 hour. And then in the end, I'll keep 15 minutes for any question answers you may have. I think first and foremost, if you see why this framework is needed and what is the definition, uh, this fraud risk framework or a forensic framework, if you can talk about, is basically to minimize the occurrence of the fraud in the organization. Let's be aware of this fact that we cannot eliminate the fraud. It can be only the reduction or the minimization of those frauds. What organization gain when this framework is implemented is they have the controls framework which can prevent the fraud happening in the organization. There can be detection modules which can be implemented which can detect in case any fraud has been done, and there can be a response team which can be implemented which can respond to any fraud which has happened, which Saurabh and Puneet was talking about when you do the investigation and how to respond to those investigations, including the legal framework around it. So a fraud framework, if I take a bookish definition, is set of procedures and guidelines to evaluate the potential fraud within the organization. And this is a specific thing that how do you identify a fraud, assess fraud, and mitigate strategies. This is a framework which is being used generally across the organizations, where you first identify the fraud, then you assess the fraud, basis the high, medium, and low, how much impact it will have. Develop these strategies, controls, and monitor it. This assessment of the fraud risk, which we defined, is basically first time when you create a framework, you assess what can be the fraud risk for the organization. But what Puneet was talking about, that whenever any fraud has been done in the company, you go back to your controls framework and see how much process revamping or process implementation needs to be done for those fraud which has happened. If you see this framework, which I will talk about in next slide, it has to be revisited frequently. There are very dynamic organization today we have. There are marketplaces, there are online companies which have a different set of fraud which may or may have happened. There are stable organizations like a manufacturing organization which will have a different type of risk which can happen. So this framework which we'll talk about needs to be visited frequently, at least once a year. A recent survey which was done by as one of the consulting firm last year, and I was going through the numbers, it talks about that 95% of Indian companies experience the new fraud. So the number is mind-boggling, which is 95% of the Indian company got into this new type of fraud which has happened. And you can very well relate to the change in the working environment which we have post-COVID. Still, a lot of companies or people are working from home or working under the hybrid model, which has given opening to a new kind of frauds which are happening. If you take certain example like customer data getting breached out, the KYC data getting breached out, the digital security which is getting breached out, the data which is going out. Talk about the recent example of mood lightning which is happening where person are working in different organization at the same point of time. Of course, the vendor collision and taking the bribe from vendor is still on the top of the agenda. So there are different scenarios which happen. So the fraud risk framework, which I'll talk about, needs to be visited frequently, at least once a year. So what did it helps to the organization? It ultimately helps the organization in one, to minimize the occurrence, and second, to detect in case anything has gone wrong. Now, what is the fraud governance framework? If we talk about, which will be a overall from the organization perspective. This is a entity level control. If you see, which means that tone of the top should be there in terms of having a robust governance overview. From where this will come? So governance overview will come from the board. So where the board plays a very crucial role in giving this message across the organization that there is a fraud governance, there is a entity level attention to this key agenda for the organization. Once this tone at the top is set up, this gives a complete roadmap on how this agenda needs to be run in the organization. And if you see from the line of defense perspective, and if we know there are generally 3 lines of defense in any organization structure. So we'll go one by one on how this oversight structure is being established in the organization and how we can have a robust fraud governance framework. So first and foremost, if you see, is the policy framework, which means you have a detailed fraud risk management policy and a fraud investigation team who will take care of it. Now, this fraud risk management policy, if you see, it is a comprehensive policy which gives the detail about how the fraud would be managed in the organization, which means you establish the framework, you establish the policy, which will have do's and don'ts and details and roles and responsibilities. You establish a fraud investigation team internally in the organization, or maybe take a help of outside organization, a consulting firm or anybody who are SMEs in this field, and establish that team where who will be investigating or who will be taking control of overall fabric of this agenda for the organization, and then start rolling this out in the organization. Now, if you see from the framework perspective, you can have a 3 type of framework. One is on the prevention side of it. Second is on the detection side of it, and third, of course, is on the reporting point, or which is the response point of it. So fraud prevention, detection, and response are the critical component of any effective fraud risk management program which any organization needs to implement. From the prevention, I think the efforts are to establish a very strong, robust internal control environment and implementing the policies and procedures which are there throughout the organization, starting from the partners ecosystem, which are our vendors, to the employees, to any third party who work with us or through us. The second would be the detection framework, which includes any fraud potential which might happen, and put a framework around it and how those things will come out, which Saurabh was also talking about, and Puneet was talking about in terms of doing the data analyticals, the reviews of the books, the accounting piece of it. And third, of course, is the response to it, which is the investigation team in terms of doing any suspected frauds, taking the corrective action, putting the legal aspect to it, and then whatever course of actions are required on that. Now, if I further drill down on these 3 pillars which we have, talking about the prevention, detection, and response. So on the prevention side, I think the first and foremost which any organization needs to have is a robust code of conduct. By robust code of conduct, I mean that the policy and procedure of the company should be properly covered in this code of conduct, with a specific section which talks about what happens in terms of any integrity related issue or a fraud related issue. This should have a specific section on do's and don'ts to give very clear message to the employees, to the partner ecosystem, the business partners or the vendors or anybody who is working with, that this is the code of conduct which organization follows in terms of anything which is going out. This actually clarifies the expected behavior of the employees, of the business partners, and anyone who is dealing with us. This also protects the reputation of the company, which gives at least to the board and to the audit committee that they had a policy or a code of conduct to tell people who are interacting that the way they need to work with this organization. It also mitigates a lot of legal and compliance risks for the organization. It gives a lot of trust to outside agencies or partners who are working with the companies, which tells them how this organization is behaving and how this organization wants to work with their business partners and employees, and what is expected out of them. This also encourages any reporting mechanism in terms of any suspected violation which may happen, which gives protection to the whistleblower that in case anything goes wrong under the code of conduct, if you report, you will be protected. So this is very, very important in terms of establishing the basic fabric of fraud governance in the organization, where everyone talks about code of conduct. Now, this code of conduct generally most of the organization gives to the employees at the time of onboarding. This is also given to the business partners at the time of bringing on board and when the organization start working on it and they get agreed in terms of what will the do's and don'ts from code of conduct perspective. And generally, most of the organization revise this on annual basis and ask the employees and business partners to sign it off every year. So this actually gives a very, very good fabric on the fraud risk and cover from the reputation perspective also. Now, the second part is the fraud risk assessment. And Puneet was talking about that there should be enough controls in the organization about what kind of fraud may happen. I think the basic parameter, if you see from the fraud risk assessment, depending on each of the organization, is to identify the potential areas where fraud may happen. And there's a complete exercise which is covered, which covered the length and breadth of the organization, starting from all the functions, including all the critical partners and the ecosystem over there, where you can identify the potential areas which are vulnerable to fraud under high, medium, and low. Put under a bracket of 6x6 metrics and see which are the potential area which are likelihood and have a potential of going wrong under the high bracket. What are the likelihood of certain things which is high but impact on the organization may be low, and so on and so forth. So once you have that 6x6 matrix of things, likelihood of things going wrong and the impact, you can identify the areas which needs to be focused from the organization perspective and which needs to be covered in the fraud risk assessment from the organization. I think over here, it gives a very, very good perspective to the organization in terms of identifying and evaluating what kind of risks are there. It also determines what kind of existing controls are there for those risks. And if there are no controls or no processes around it, it gives an opportunity to build up those processes and control. It also helps one to identify the additional controls which may be required either on the process side or on the IT side or on your underlying ERP systems, and also help the continuous monitoring of these risks once they are identified. Now, this is also very, very important, and generally this fraud risk assessment is being kept at the entity level. The controls or the risks which are identified becomes part of the internal financial controls of the organization or given to the internal auditors to pick up during their internal audit as well. Most of the organizations do an annual fraud risk assessment or a testing, both from design perspective as well as from operating effectiveness perspective, to make sure that the relevant risks are being covered over here and there are enough controls and processes to manage those risks. The third very important piece is in terms of preventive control from fraud risk perspective is the due diligence. Now, what that due diligence means? This is both for employees as well as for the vendors or the business partners which we bring on board. Now, if you see from the employee perspective, there are background checks which most of the organization do, which gives a perspective on what employee is all about, what is his background, does he have any criminal thing in the past, what was his behavior in the past organization when those background checks are being done, and so on and so forth. The second piece is due diligence being done on the business partner side, which means to identify whether those business partners are good working for the organization. Do they have any past criminal cases against them? What kind of behavior they have from the integrity perspective with their other partners? This also give a perspective that whether these partners have any linkage with the current employees or the past employees within the company, and give a very, very good understanding to the person that anyone who is coming on board dealing with us has a fair code of conduct at their side of it. This due diligence is one done once you bring a person on board, but mostly for the partner ecosystem, depending on how critical that partner is, it should be done periodically as well to make sure that the partner who are managing this thing does not have any linkage with our own employee, and there are no fresh cases which are happening or has happened in the marketplace on those business partners. So this DDR again becomes a very, very important piece in terms of creating the preventive framework around fraud. Now there are different kind of policies. One, we spoke about code of conduct. There is also a very important piece which is on the anti-bribery and anti-corruption policy, which is of course as of now not fully implemented from India perspective, but we have a lot of policies or this act which are there in US as well as in European countries. This policy on anti-bribery and anti-corruption specifically talks about the things which are completely no-no from the organization perspective. And there are different examples that whether what will happen in case a person is taking a bribe, and what is the organization stand in terms of giving any bribe or encouraging any corruption when dealing with outside party or outside ecosystem, maybe different vendors or a government agencies or at the time of taking the contract. So this policy also gives very, very clear framework from the organization perspective, what the organization talks about, what they want, and how they want the employees to behave. Now, this is when this anti-bribery and anti-corruption policy is created. It gives the clear and very, very indicative thing what can be done, what cannot be done. This also covers the training piece of it and awareness piece of it. And this also covers the reporting mechanism within the organization. This, of course, is generally being created in terms of the legal and the statutory framework which we may have in the country of operations where it is getting implemented. But from India perspective, generally the cases or the point of view of bribery and bribery on both sides have been covered. Now, the data leakage is another important piece, considering that we have this work from home culture which has started after COVID. There are a lot of people working from different sites. From the fraud perspective, today there's lots and lots of issue happening on this data leakage. Taking a simple example, if we are working in a bank, there are leakage of customer information. There are leakage of potential customer who are asking for loan from a bank and it goes out. There are KYCs which are getting leaked in the market. There are customer information which goes to the competitors for sake of money. So there is a prevention mechanism in most of the organizations which are implementing now from the fraud perspective. There are good amount of tools which are available, which can be implemented on your outlooks or any email messaging system which you have in the organization. I'll give a very simple example. Like you put a DLP tool on your email stuff, which also controls what is happening from your mobile phones. You put a critical words like bribe or customer information or police or anything around that. It gives a trigger back to the monitoring team that this kind of leakage has happened or the email has gone out from the organization, which you can go back and ask from the person that why this information has gone out and what is the usage of this. There are also a lot of time once you put this kind of control, you find that there are enough master data floating within the company, which should not be the case, and you can put a restriction around it. This framework actually talks about starting from defining and classifying the sensitive data within the company and making people aware that this is a sensitive data which they cannot share outside the organization. Also putting enough controls in the underlying applications which you may have, the ERP applications or wherever you're controlling the data which is sensitive. Putting restriction and giving appropriate access to the people on need to know basis rather than having access with everyone and putting control around it. Developing a policy and procedure in terms of handling of this sensitive data and making people aware that if something goes wrong, they would be accountable for those leakage or mishandling of that data. training the people about the sensitivity of this data and data protection, and also regularly reviewing it, which I mentioned. If you see in today's world, there are insider trading regulations which are there from the SEBI side for the listed companies. So in case the company does not have appropriate data leakage prevention tools or a policy around it, a lot of time the accounting information or the finance information also goes out before it is getting published, and the insider trading happens on this aspect. So it is also very important piece from the preventive control perspective on the fraud side to have a data leakage things. SOD, we have everyone of us are aware of it. The segregation of duty is within the functions. It is between the different applications which needs to be established from the code. So very simple example which every one of us are aware about is like the person who is putting the purchase requisition in the system should not have control on the POs, and the person who is issuing the PO should not have control on the invoices which are coming up in the system, and the person who is putting the invoices in the system should not have the access for approving it. So end-to-end control should not be there to avoid any fraud which may happen. So SOD is very, very important from the prevention control perspective in all the underlying functions, applications which we may have. Of course, the organization can have a detection controls or internal audit which happens post facto. But once we have a very, very robust SOD system or a controls in the organization, the potential of collaboration between people or things getting undetected gets reduced tremendously. So this is one of very, very another important piece of putting in the organization from the fraud perspective. Now, the last piece which comes under prevention module is the training and awareness. I think every organization needs to spend disproportionate time on making people aware and giving them trainings. Puneet, in his presentation, and Saurabh was also mentioning about that when the case happens, we go back and see where are the process, the gaps which has happened, and try to fill those process gaps. I think this awareness piece is very, very important from that perspective, which means that once a fraud is detected, from the preventive perspective, that it should not reoccur. The organization needs to be aware of it. There should be enough trainings to the people who were controlling that process to make them aware that this fraud has already happened, and they need to make sure that this fraud should not reoccur within the organization, and give an adequate amount of trainings to them. So this is one of the first framework of prevention from the oversight perspective which needs to be there to make sure that the fraud, if any, are minimized or does not occur in the organization. Now, the second piece, which is important, comes from the detection perspective. And the ombudsman and whistleblower investigation, we had a detailed 1.5 presentation by Puneet in terms of in case anything has happened, how the investigation needs to be there. But to give a perspective, I think from there can be two aspects to it. One, you have an internal team of investigation, or you can have a outside whistleblower team, which you can give it to a third party. But this information should be cascaded across the organization and including the business partner, that who is the person who is the ombudsman or a whistleblower or a investigation team which is there, which of course should be covered in the code of conduct also. But the phone numbers, the email ID, or where the person can give the complaint should be reiterated again and again to the entire ecosystem, which gives one the confidence to the people that there is a independent team when the complaint goes will be investigating it, and get lots and lots of confidence to them. And second, at point of time whenever any fraud is happening or something wrongdoing is happening, there's a flick of second where person wants to report at that point of time itself. And if this information is not available, I, at least from my experience, I've seen the next day person does not report. He finds certain more justification to himself that why should I go and tell, somebody else will do it. So this having a good whistleblower team, clear ombudsman function within the organization should be established. This information with the phone number, the email ID, the complaint, the way the organization wants to manage should go out, should be the part of the training module, should be part of the induction of the employees, should be part of the code of conduct, should be part of the information that goes out the ecosystem, which is the vendors or the associate or anybody else who is working, including the customer. In case anybody from the organization perspective is doing anything wrong, this is the place which they can reach out. And then, of course, the investigation piece, which was mentioned by Puneet and others, can take from there. Now, the second piece is the fraud risk assessment control testing. We spoke about the fraud risk assessment. Generally, these controls which are being framed from the RCM perspective or from the controls perspective falls part of the process of each of the function in the organization. In the past, what we have seen for this piece to be effective, this should be signed off by the board, audit committee, as well as by the statutory auditors. That these are the fraud risks which we have identified and which we will be monitoring on annually basis and as well as revisiting it whenever required. The design of it should be, of course, tested every year and should be revisited whenever any fraud happens. Go back to this FRA assessment and see what needs to be amended, changed, enhanced, or deleted. This should also be part of the internal audit plan. We should give this fraud risk whenever they are having their risk-based audit plan. They can cover if certain fraud risk areas for their process that they are doing the audit. And we should also give this as a part of the finance controls from the IFC perspective. At least annually, when you are doing this control testing, you understand that design is working in the organization, in the underlying applications and systems, and it is working fine. So this also gave, from the detection perspective, a very, very good mechanism of understanding whether the robust processes are there in the organization or not. And in case anything is not working, it gives an opportunity to plug those down. The advanced data analyticals, again, we saw certain examples of dates getting changed, or we saw certain examples of overriding in fluid, which the earlier team was showing in terms of any fraud which may or may not happen. I think in today's world, with kind of data we are generating in most of the organization, those manual things does not help much. So there are enough tools which are available in today's market where you can put in the system for analyzing or detecting any fraud which may happen. Now, I'll take a very simple example. Like if you have a DOA in the organization which talks about that a purchase order should go to a particular authority for approval after a threshold, but person wants to circumvent that and don't want to send that PO to the above authority. So we'll start splitting the PO, which means, let's take an example that a purchase order should be of 10 lakh rupees. If it is going, if it is below above 10 lakh, it goes to a different authority. So the person starts splitting it. He will put a 8 lakh PO and another PO for 3 lakh and issue it. So it will not go to the other person for approval. It might not come during normal audit. It might not come from manual review of anything. So if you have a robust analytical tool which is implemented, it gives an indication that something is going wrong. Person is splitting this PO and he wants to circumvent the DOA and something might be there, which gives a red flag indication in terms of. If you take an example of, say, online or a marketplace company like a Flipkart or Amazon, if you put a data analytics tool saying where are the areas where returns are happening quite frequently, what is the customer who is refunding the amount, which is a customer where we are time and again giving the bonuses or discounts or giving the entire money back to them. So those kind of data analytical, once you put, it gives an indication that something is going wrong and gives an advance notice to the management or a fraud investigation team that please go and investigate over here. Of course, when there is a complaint where you want to evaluate things, there are enough tools which are available which matches the data from different systems and gives the information out that whatever is the complaint, whether it is right or wrong. There are red flags which can, again, from the detection module can be implemented. Very simple examples. Changing the bank account every time whenever the payment is made and reinstating the earlier bank account. So if you create a log within the system which gives a trigger that how many times a bank account is getting changed or how many times the address of a customer is getting changed, which gives a red flag that something is going wrong over here. Red flags like the general vouchers which are getting booked on a Sunday or a discounting entries which are being put for a particular account every day, which also gives a red flag. So once you have an automation system within the organization, from the detection perspective, it gives a lot of information back to the management. It can be a internal auditors team, it can be this fraud investigation team, or it can be a second line of defense within the organization, like a controller function, to give them the indication that something is going wrong over here, and then they can investigate. I think from detection perspective, we need to be sure of two things. One, a very, very strong whistleblower mechanism, which means somebody from outside or within the company comes and tell that something has gone wrong. And second is a piece where some from the past data which has happened, an automatic detection is done by the team rather than waiting for somebody to complete it. So once this detection module is split into these two stuff, there are enough evidences of survey available in the past that there has been substantial reduction in the fraud which are happening, or the frauds are getting earlier detected rather than more damage to the organization. If you see after this data analytical tools and robust mechanism which are there now, the survey which was done last year in terms of how much damage has happened, the percentage of damage from financial perspective has gone down from 67% to 52%. Still, the number is very, very high, which means that 50% of the cases damage is being done, but there are progress which is being shown. How much is the damage? Once the investigation, which is a part of the first process, is being done, it can be identified. But at least the amount can be reduced to the larger extent when these automation stuff and analytical stuffs are being implemented. Now, the response side, I think again it's a very, very important that there is an independent team which is established within the organization or outside the organization, which gives a lot of comfort to the whistleblower that they have an independent person who will be reviewing their complaint, and there will not be any repercussion back to that person. This steering committee should be very, very clear and independent from normal business. Like in most of the organization, you will have a person who heads the ombudsman as an investigation authority, can be a third party, followed by a CEO or a CEO and a HR representation in that ombudsman steering committee, which reviews all the complaints, comes and recommend what kind of actions are required or to be required to be done. I think this gives the rules and parameters for the organization. This also put a dedicated committee which independently reviews it. This also have a complete scope and responsibilities which are well known to everyone. And this also ensure the confidentiality of the whistleblower so that it does not go out. So this committee is very, very important to give confidence to the ecosystem that once the investigation or when the whistleblower is done, there will not be repercussion back to them. Take an example of a partner. Somebody from the organization is asking money from that partner for a particular share of a business or for a particular work, or there are asks from the customer that I'll give you more discount, but give me the money back or a kickback. If the partner does not have a confidence in the organization that if I give the complaint, he might have a fear of losing the business. So he will never get open up. If the customer knows that if I don't give this kickback to the person who is asking for it, I will not get the discount. And if he does not have a confidence in the system, he will never come and open and do that. Same thing is in the employees. If the employee understand that if I do a whistleblower, I have a repercussion within the company, I will also may lose my job, he will never come and open up. So this ombudsman committee is very, very important, which needs to be established. This needs to be known to everyone. That is an independent one. And they operate without any repercussion back. Another important piece from this ombudsman steering committee from their governance perspective is that any complaint which comes, it has to be timely and thoroughly investigated, and the information should go back to the whistleblower that this was your complaint and this is the way we are closing it. A lot of organization does not investigate an anonymous complaint, but my personal experience is that all the complaints should be analyzed and should be investigated, and then the appropriate action can be taken. Now, in most of the organizations, if you see from the investigation perspective, which the Puneet and Saurav was talking about, it is either about your partners or your customer or your employees. Our recommendation generally is that when you are doing this, you should not be touching the employee till that time you are aware or have a good fact that he has done something wrong. Then only we should start doing the investigation and doing that discussion. So all these parameters and framework needs to get covered under this ombudsman steering committee. Generally, the steering committee responds to the audit committee or a board, depending on how is the structure, and it is very independent. They don't have any reporting to a CEO or a CEO, and should not have it, to maintain their independent and actions whatever they do. It also gives confidentiality piece, because there might be senior members, or there might be the management who themselves are involved in the fraud. So this team has to be independent, without any without any reporting responsibility within the organization. Now, of course, the action piece, which is very important. Uh, it may be that you are able to substantiate the fraud, or you are not able to substantiate the fraud, but might need certain changes in the ecosystem, revising the controls or the processes. But anything which comes as a whistleblower, the action should be taken. Uh, of course, this action has to be taken within the legal framework. Uh, Unfortunately, for most of the private organization, we don't have any fraud or a bribery kind of act in India. So it is very difficult to go back to the police and go for an FIR, and also very difficult to go back to the court and put those cases around it. But whatever actions we want to take, it should be within the legal parameters. If you are taking an action against the person for removing it from the organization, either terminating him or resigning for him, we need to go back and see what is the employment letter we have at the time of that person joining the company. What kind of clauses we are including in the employment letter, which gives the authority to us to remove that person in case anything is going wrong. Generally, in most of the organizations, the appointment letter covers a clause saying anything related to integrity or anything related to COC, your services will be terminated or will be removed. So that gives the lever to the organization to take an action, and not going on the wrong side of legal issues on those. So that also is very important. Now, this action generally is recommended by the steering committee and has been and generally getting implemented. There are enough cases whether you want to name and shame the person within the organization or you don't want to do it. It depends on what is the fabric and how the organization wants to operate. But this action is also very important. Once the action is taken, our recommendation or my recommendation personally is that we should go back and revise the framework. We should cascade what has been done because of the wrongdoing, whether you want to name that person or not name the person, but the information should go back to the ecosystem telling that we have removed a person because he has done a fraud, or we have removed a person because he was not on the right side of the table. So that action needs to be communicated back. Now, if the case where we are not able to substantiate the fraud, at least go back and revisit the process, go back and revisit the controls framework in the organization and make the appropriate changes in the system. Now, the remediation. So this I talk about that, highlight the process gaps to the functional. It's very important to do it from the organization perspective, because doing the investigation, getting to know what has gone wrong, getting to know that this fraud has happened because of XYZ reason, we should always go back and try to plug those gaps. Of course, the person who was doing the fraud gets new ways of doing it, and they keep on exploring more and more ways. But still, whatever we identify should be highlighted and closed with the function heads or within the team. The regulatory response is also very important. There are certain things which are required from the listed company perspective, like SEBI have a process of highlighting the fraud to them after a particular threshold. We also have a regulation stating that in case we are doing an investigation against any senior person or a key managerial position person, that needs to be reported to the stock exchange and the SEBI. So we need to be on the right side of the regulatory environment also to respond. In case there are enormous complaint, generally the decision is taken by the oversight board how much and what to report outside. But we need to be very sure that there are enough mechanism available within the company to report to the regulatory authorities within the defined timelines which is there from the guidelines perspective. Now, there are certain things which are not required to be reported, which of course then goes to the steering committee or to the board, which is internal to the company. But the information which needs to go outside needs to be carefully handled because it has a lot of reputational risk for the organization. It might have a lot of issues on the stock price of the company and also on how the other people see from outside in perspective. I think very, very important piece. The last, again, we spoke about the oversight with the stone of the top, which gives the entire fabric to the organization. People are aware that this is a no-nonsense organization and integrity is very, very important. And in case anyone does any fraud, it will be taken very, very seriously. It will have repercussions on persons getting removed from the company. It may have repercussions on partners or the vendors who are giving bribe to the organizations, and it will have impact on their reputation as well. I think the key, if I want to sum it up, have a good oversight within the organization, which means have a good board and a tone of the top. Create the line of defense, which is once the policy framework, which talks about the fraud policies, the code of conduct policies, the ombudsman function, the investigation team. Second line of defense, which is the fraud risk management framework, divide that into prevention, detection, and response, into the high, medium, and low. You can't boil the ocean, so we need to see what are the high impact, high likelihood of things going wrong coming into that framework. Establish that, have a robust mechanism of reviewing on annual basis and on regular basis, and have an oversight function coming from either from the board or the audit committee, which gives enough comfort outside and as well as the employees that this is very, very important from the organization perspective. So that's it from my side. Over to Bharat, in case any questions we have on this.
Yeah, thank you so much, sir. It was a very, again, very informative session. There's just one or two questions that have actually come up, so we'll be discussing those. And I just want to share my comments. Every year, a report is released. Every alternate year, a report is released by the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners regarding fraud and abuse globally. And it is they always tell us 5% of the total revenue organizations are losing every year due to fraud. But still in my career of 10 years, 12 years, it has been very difficult to actually convince clients that you need to have a robust fraud risk management system. So that is the problem here is another problem here is of awareness, which is, I feel, which is very important. And I'm hoping that after in few years, organizations would be more accepting to the idea of a fraud risk management program. So I just now jump to the questions, so there is this question by Mr. Abhishek from Delhi. If PR is made by A and PO is made by B, but B cannot change quantity or reject PR, will it be called as segregation of duty?
Yeah, so if a PR is made by one person and PO is getting made by another person, do you already have a segregation of duty within the company? I think from the controls perspective within the underlying applications, generally in the PR, you don't have a rate. You only have an intent that the person wants this item to come with the quantity. And I don't think so. There is more fraud which can come by amending the quantities, always on the rate side, which potentially leads to a fraud. But if you put a control in the company that the PR can be just converted into a PO from the quantity perspective, and rate automatically comes from the master database rather than anybody inputting it. So that gives a good controls from the fraud perspective on PR to PO.
Okay. Thank you, sir. I think the rest are mostly the comments there, about how great the session was. So the people are congratulating. So thank you so much, sir, for your valuable information. I think there's some disturbance here. But thank you very much, and I congratulate you and thank you on behalf of DAB and SAFA for this wonderful session. And we hope to have more such information sessions with you again. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks everyone.
I think, can we conclude, sir? Amit sir, can we conclude here? Yes, yeah. Thank you. So thank you all the participants for attending the session. And it was a very, in my opinion, it was a very useful, information-packed session. 2 hours of a lot of information, very useful information, practical information, which I think we all can take away. So thank you all, and I think that's the end. Thank you.